So those kind of details, I find them to be like really fascinating and delicious details. I mean, his impact was huge. I think um, we're still unpacking it. You see Aaron Douglas's work. You see kind of how he's framing the African American experience or the experiences. A lot more people recognize his work even if they don't know his name. Hi, everyone. My name is Chenoa Baker. I'm a curator, writer, and adjunct professor based in Philadelphia, although my projects kind of take me all over. And the focus of my work is really on Afro diasporic craftways. So I kind of like use that big term to encompass all different types of media, really interested in the history of African American artists, especially. Because of that expansive lens, I get to be interdisciplinary, which is really fun, and do these really cool deep dives, like the deep dive on Aaron Douglas. So I think what might be helpful is to kind of position him in a timeline of what's going on even in America at the same time. So he was born 1898 and he died 1979. But the high point of his practice, or considered his prime, is during the Harlem Renaissance of the 20s and 30s. So he's really positioned during this time in between wars, that's having a boon in African American cultural exploration at the time. Because he's positioned in this space, there are also writers and thinkers that he's interacting with. So, actually, my thesis in undergrad was really charting how he is what I call the artistic apparatus of the New Negro movement, which is basically synonymous with the Harlem Renaissance. But the New Negro really came from Alain Locke in 1925. He wrote this anthology. It included so many other thinkers, Claude McKay, for example, Langston Hughes, so many different people in this anthology. But basically, it was a moment of breaking away from the background of slavery and treating that as like a blip in our history and not really our history, but repositioning the lens to think about Africa being the start of that history. I think it's important to note like these relationships that are happening to understand Aaron Douglas. But then again, like I said, in 1925, that was that pivotal year where actually Aaron Douglas moved to New York by way of Kansas City. He has some like really great quote, like, even if I have to sweep floors for a living, I need to go to New York. So he's swept up in the lore of how amazing New York is. He's hearing about all these incredible artists and thinkers at the time that are really based there. And at the time, he met a German graphic designer, Winold Rice, and that's someone he kind of was studying under. So, after moving to New York, he in 1927 actually studied in Marion, Pennsylvania, because he was awarded a fellowship with the Barnes Foundation. So, as you probably are familiar with, the Barnes Foundation and Albert Barnes really was a major patron of the Harlem Renaissance. So, he's really being cultivated with a lot of these collectors at the time, like the Harmon Foundation is another one. And so the strengths of that collection really spans from like still life to genre painting, impressionism, all of those different things, but also a huge collection of African, West and Central African work. So he's really being able to kind of see that firsthand through that experience. He also, at the same year, so 1927, was the editor of Art Crisis. So he's really, Aaron Douglas is involved in the community at that time. And then in 1937 to 1966, he taught at Fisk University. And that's also kind of influencing him as an educator and an artist. And I think I'll go through a couple more dates that I think are super relevant to his practice, and then I'll start talking about, his style and how he fits into all of this. But also in like 1934, he's painting this mural series called Aspects of Negro Life. It's this four-part mural for the New York Public Library, and it's his most famous series. So a lot of people, when they think of the Harlem Renaissance, whether they realize it or not, this is kind of the poster for it. So he's doing all of these allegorical scenes. Some of them are almost pseudo biblical, I would say, but they're really about the African American experience of like coming from Africa, then going through enslavement, the period after it, kind of Civil War, Reconstruction, Redemption, all of those things. He does it in this massive mural to show these time periods kind of overlapping, and then also encouraging the current period during that time of cultural exploration. So that's what he's really the most famous for. And then in 1937 and 38, he ends up getting a Rosenwald Foundation Fellowship where he travels to the South, to the Dominican Republic, to Haiti. I mention all those things because I'm sure those are also influences culturally to the work he's doing at the time. In that prime era, his style is really influenced by jazz. So he creates these silhouettes that are these anonymous people, and they're surrounded by these reverberations. So it's very geometric, very reminiscent of like Art Deco style and artistry. And he's using that language, which is the language, the visual language of the time, but applying it for the first time to African American subject matter. So as he's kind of creating these reverberations around people, he's really framing these pivotal moments in African American history. So, or he's even, I would even go farther to say that while some are not one particular moment, it's kind of to capture a feeling of an era. Almost how music, I feel like, captures feeling. His work does the same. I think it's a pretty weird thing. I personally have not seen another self-portrait from him before. Yeah, so I kind of jumped for joy when I saw that one. But the self-portrait work in the collection made in 1930 is a very important work of that collection. I think it's also because it showcases other works that he's working on at the time. Part of the practice of making a self-portrait has so many other things attached to it. So, for example, I identified the other paintings in the background, which was really fun for me to go down the rabbit hole of being like, okay, which painting is this one? Which painting is that one? But Judgment Day is one of the paintings closest to the artist in the painting. There's also Noah's Ark, which was made in 1927. Some other works like Into Bondage, which is the one he's currently working on. So all of those works are surrounding him. So I kind of think of it as a composite work for me, which is exciting, like as an art historian, as a curator, um, being able to see that history within one painting. So again, really thinking about how he's this master storyteller. This portrait is no different from his storytelling and his manipulation of narrative in a good way, of course. It really shows him focused and in the studio, in medias res, really depicting this realist style that he has. But it's also an oil painting, which is not a medium he works in all that often. And even just thinking back to the European tradition of self-portraits, thinking to like Dutch painters in the 1600s, of around that time, that's really when self-portraits were having a resurgence and becoming popular. It was a time to sort of to express your talent as an artist. Like oftentimes it's the artist who's behind the work and you don't really see the artist all the time. It's really a device to communicate that, I did this, this is my work, which for Aaron Douglas as a Black man during that time, I think, is even more important to show, like, I'm making this work. It's not coming from a white or European descendant painter, but he looks like a very dignified figure, which is very in line with a lot of his work of trying to dignify African Americans in a time when they are kind of depicted in these very like grotesque ways. At the same time he's working, there's also minstrel imagery at the same time. So I think that in this case, the self-portrait device for him is really important to show like he's educated, he's cultured, he's making this work. So I think that's what really drew me to that work because it's so many layers upon layers upon layers. And to sort of circle back to some of the other works in the collection, there's two works. They're not per se, I would say that they're relatively unique within his practice, but they're not as rare as the other two. Again, because he's known for this like very specific style that kind of actually traces to the end of his practice. You know, he creates this like image called Emperor Jones, and it's very reminiscent of the silhouette that he's done in the 30s, but it kind of carries all the way through. These two are very different from that. So the student in 1939 is really this like warm painting using his signature colors of like the greens, the yellows, the browns. So in that way, it's like very similar to what he did in the mid 30s. This is while Douglas was a professor at Fisk. So his work is again parallel to his practice and what that looked like at the time, depicting a student while being a professor at university. But this has a very like painterly style that's almost impressionist, which is very different again from what he's doing in the mid 30s. So I anticipate its experimentation, but also kind of pulling from how I mentioned he was at the Barnes Foundation and, you know, really leading into these like European impressionist works. So I see him kind of borrowing from that influence. And then again, while this is not sort of emblematic of his typical subject matter that's like historical or religious, this is sort of a genre painting that's taking this like individual moment. But again, it kind of shows his dedication to positive representations of African American subjects that he's really continuing as a through line in his practice. There's also this beautiful halo of light that kind of beams in from the window around the sitter. So that is also kind of one of his stylistic signatures, even if it's not done, you know, the exact same way he's doing work in the mid 30s. It's still kind of reappearing in this work, even though it's a different style. And I think that the anonymity again is like something that, you know, he was doing in the mid 30s, and now I think it's also important in this work because it means that he really believed in the mobility of Black people through cultural advancement and education. So by not saying it's a specific student, even titling it, he's really depicting that, you know, this could be anyone. So I really see it as connected to his practice, but it's not his typical style and theme. And then Brass Jug is kind of also very similar, even though it's made 1 year after the Aspects of Negro Life series. It's a still life. I call it like Cezanne-esque kind of an image. This work really shows the range, again, of Douglas as a painter, where he's able to sort of combine a little bit of realism while also kind of getting this painterly effect, almost like a lime wash in the background and the foreground. So those kind of details, I find them to be like really fascinating and delicious details in the work because it really just shows how talented of an artist he is. So, I mean, there's just so many things that he did during that time that have continued to expand. And like I said, a lot more people recognize his work even if they don't know his name, and they understand the concepts even if they've never read Alain Locke and his like New Negro philosophy, or if they don't know the intricacies of like W.B. Du Bois and what he's talking about with the talented 10th. There's just this like instinctual recognition. You see Aaron Douglas's work, you see kind of how he's framing the African American experience or the experiences, and there's this just kind of immediate sort of response to it.